Hi, my name's Giampetruzzi, and I'm a junior at Emory University, and I'm going to give a lecture on conditionality. So, in order to understand what conditionality is, there are some basic things to go through. First is, why does conditionality matter, right? Why did it even come up? And the reason that it comes up is because there are advocacies in debate, right? An advocacy in debate is a proposal for action that can be adopted by an actor and is distinct from the plan. So that includes negative arguments that you've seen, such as counter plans or critique alternatives, that all propose different action than the affirmative. Each advocacy then has a status, right? The status defines how the advocacy can be removed from the debate round once it has been introduced, right? So once it's been introduced by the 1NC, when can it stay in the debate? It answers thus the question of, can the advocacy be kicked, and under what circumstances can it be kicked? So there's three types of status. The first one is unconditional. So this means that the negative must keep the advocacy for the entire round. The judge thus must, at the end of the round, compare the affirmative to the counterplan or the alternative that's been introduced into the debate. The opposite of unconditional is conditional, and this means that the negative can remove or kick the advocacy whenever it wants. The judge then will be told where to focus their comparison, and they can be forced to shift towards comparing the plan to the status quo. Dispositional is sort of the middle ground between the two. And this means that the negative can remove or kick the advocacy under certain conditions. The list of those conditions varies, and you should ask for specific conditions when you're asking about the status of the advocacy. But the most common understanding is that when a defensive argument is made, the counterplan can be kicked. So if the affirmative makes a permutation, the affirmative makes a no link argument to the net benefit, then the negative can kick the counterplan. So this was sort of a set of funny memes that I thought are useful for explaining the context of conditionality, unconditionality, and dispositionality. So unconditionality sort of forever, right? It doesn't leave the debate. The judge must look at it at the end of the debate. Conditional, I don't know, maybe, right? Depending on the negative strategy, they might kick it, they might not, but there's nothing really grounding them. Dispositional, it depends on the context. It depends on the conditions. Has the affirmative made a defensive argument or another set of conditions? So how do you know all of these different things, right? How do you know the conditions? How do you know the status of the counterplan? You ask in cross-ex, and you should always ask in 1NC cross-ex, right? So if you're a 1A, you should ask in 1NC cross-ex, what is the status of the counterplan? What is the status of the alternative? Or what's the status of everything, right? And then usually the negative will tell you it's conditional, it's dispositional, it's unconditional. And if they say dispositional, you can always ask, what are the conditions under which it can be kicked? So since we saw that sort of the extreme is conditionality, right? The negative can sort of kick it whenever it wants. We're going to talk about first what it's like to be negative when you're debating an argument that says that conditionality is bad. And then we're going to go through what it's like to be affirmative. So starting off with conditionality good. Why is it a good thing? The main argument, the main offensive argument is negative flexibility. So being able to kick the advocacy whenever the negative wants allows the negative to be more flexible, right? This is necessary since being affirmative is so much easier, right? Why is it easier? The affirmative speaks first and last, so they have a sort of advantage in the speech orders. They write vague plans. They can break new afts and new advantages, so they can sort of always control and shift the context of the debate. So there's other conditionality good arguments besides the main one of negative flexibility. There's critical thinking. So multiple worlds force us to make our best arguments in the 2AC, right? 2As have to be smart. They have to choose where they're going to invest their time on every flow because it could be removed at any point. Real world education, policymakers must defend their arguments from the left and right. People frequently employ the example of Obama having to defend himself from both the left and the right and reason with both sides. Then sort of some defensive arguments are a reasonability-esque argument, sort of that voting on theory crowds out substance and fails to deter because decisions don't spill over, right? No one sees why a specific decision caused a certain thing in a debate, so it doesn't stop people from doing it in the future. And also, because of that, you should always evaluate what the affirmative what the negative did and not what it could justify, right? Not the worst form of conditionality, but let's say in this debate, there was only one conditional advocacy or there was only two conditional advocacies, right? They shouldn't imagine a world where there are like 50 conditional counterplans because that's not what we did. So we shouldn't be held guilty for the worst case scenario. When you're affirmative and you're saying that conditionality is bad, you also have a main offensive argument, and that's strategy skew. So strategy skew says that conditionality lets the negative introduce all of these random worlds and bad counterplans without any cost, right? So the AF must always defend the plan, right? If you're AF, you're always stuck to the plan, but the negative just gets all of these different options with no threshold for explanation that they can just remove from the debate at any point. So why is that bad? It means that the affirmative has a very tough time constructing a 2AC, constructing a 1AR to all these different worlds because they don't know how to explain the AF in all of these different contexts. Conditionality also creates a sort of bad research model for the negative because smart 2Ns can force contradictions in unreciprocal ways that then disadvantage the AF, right? So in response to like a no cost neg option, the AF has to make these 50 blippy arguments and undercover the case and just have a shallow debate because their strategy was so skewed. So additional arguments also that exist for conditionality bad. First is research and advocacy. So conditionality discourages research and leads to shallow debate. This was sort of some of the impact arguments I was making on strategy skew. So if you're a smart 2N and you know that conditionality can be used at any point, then you can cut 5 cards on like 10 counterplans instead of cutting 50 cards and focusing your research on one core counterplan. So what this argument says is that only forcing the negative to defend its advocacy actually encourages both teams to explore the nuances and controversies of the topic. Then a defensive argument for the affirmative to make is that a lot of times the negative team will say you should reject the argument, not the team, right? You should, if you think that this counterplan is so bad because it's conditional, then remove it from the debate and then just focus on the other arguments in the debate, right? Reject the argument, not the team. Don't just vote us down because of it. The answer to that when you're affirmative is that when you reject the argument, you're engaging in conditionality. You're literally kicking the counterplan for them. It means that there's no cost to introducing positions because voting on theory is necessary in order to correct sort of these bad practices of conditionality in debate rounds and eliminate the moral hazard that people have to read these conditional advocacies in the future. So that was sort of the summary of all the conditionality good and conditionality bad arguments. And I hope that answered any questions.